In this video I'm gonna show you how to retarget animations onto the CC4D Control Rig. I will give you some approaches on how to manually transfer data coming from different sources like Character Creator and iClone, the ActorCore library, Mixamo, or custom motion capture data coming from Rokoko Studio. It's not an automated solution yet, but I already tried to streamline the process as much as possible. For example, with the recent 1.02 update of the CC4D Tools, where I included the presets category in the asset browser contents, holding some presets for the character definition manager. Let's first take a look at motion data coming directly from Character Creator or iClone. For this example, I will use the dance turn male animation from the preview motion list in Character Creator. To export the animation, go to File, Export, FBX and choose Clothed Character. For the export settings, choose Cinema 4D as your target tool preset and choose the option Motion under FBX options. Type in your desired target FPS under the Include Motion tab and make sure Current Animation is checked. Also make sure that the checkbox First Frame in Bind Pose is checked as well. When your animation is coming from iClone, go to File, Export and choose Export FBX. Choose Cinema 4D as your target tool preset. Select your FPS. Under Export Range, select All or set your desired range and click Export. In Cinema 4D I already have a CC3 Plus character exported from Character Creator, to which we will apply the control rig in a minute. But first let's have a look at our exported animation data. When we open up the FBX file and hit play, we can check if the animation was exported successfully and if the character is in its bind pose at the first frame of the sequence. We would be good to go to start the retargeting process with this, but I have one last problem. And this is that the overall positional translation is on the root joint of the joint hierarchy. Of course, I could retarget the movement of the root joint to the master control of the CC4D Control Rig, but I would rather have this positional translation on the hip control than on the master control. Therefore, I'm gonna quickly resample the motion of the root joint to the hip joint. Let's start by making a duplicate of our joint hierarchy. We can do this by dragging the joint hierarchy while holding Control in the Object Manager. That's it for now and move on to removing the animation data of our root joint and our hip joint. Select the root joint of the original hierarchy and in the Attributes tab under Coordinates, select the position and rotation channels by clicking on each channel you want to select while holding Shift until they are highlighted in orange. Right-click on one of them and under Animation choose Delete Track. Let's do the same thing for the hip joint. When you hit play now, you can see that the root motion has been removed completely. To restore the motion of the hip joint, we're gonna add a constraint tag to it, which we will set to transform. As the constraint target, we're gonna put in the hip joint of the duplicated joint hierarchy. When we hit play now, we can see that the movement of the hip joint has been restored while the root joint stays in its place. Now all that's left to do before we can move on is to bake the position and the rotation of the original hip joint. Open up the timeline and drag in the hip joint. Go to Functions, Bake Objects. In the small pop-up window we have some baking options. We don't want to create a copy. We want to have clean tracks. We need position data, rotation data, but we don't need animated parameters. Once the baking is done, we can close the timeline, remove the constraint tag and the duplicated hierarchy, and do one last check of our animation. When your animation is coming from iClone, you can do this directly within iClone. Right-click on your motion clip, go to Root Motion and select Sample Root to Hip. As the animation was exported with Character Creator, it's probably a good idea to check the joint hierarchy for null objects and convert them back to joints with the CC4D Convert Nulls to Joints tool. Select the root joint and click the CC4D Convert Nulls to Joints icon. Now we can create a null object to group our joint hierarchy and copy everything. The first thing to do in the scene with our CC3 Plus character is to make sure it uses the correct FPS settings by choosing the mode project in the Attributes tab and adjusting the value there. Let's now quickly prepare our character exported from Character Creator by converting all null objects in the joint hierarchy back to joints, optimizing the joint hierarchy, removing all morph target geometry, and running the control rig setup. Now we can go ahead and paste in the skeleton with the animation into our scene. Before we can start the retargeting process now, we need to make some adjustments to the control rig settings. We need to switch the kinematics mode of the arms and legs from inward kinematics to forward kinematics because we're gonna retarget onto the FK controls of the control rig. We can easily do that by selecting the hand or leg control, snapping the FK controls to the position of the IK controls just to be safe, and setting the IK-FK blend slider to 100%. On the hand controls, we also need to make sure that the FK follow shoulder parameter is set to 100%, so the FK controls are following the rotation of the shoulder control. Optionally, you can also set the new elbow auto pole parameter to 100% in case you want to bake its position down later on. Now we're gonna start the retargeting process by adding a character definition tag to the hierarchy holding the animation data. We open up the character definition manager by clicking the button in the Attributes tab when the tag is selected. We have the option here to manually assign the joints from the joint hierarchy to their respective body parts and do the same thing for the control rig and its controls, or we can load a preset and extract the skeleton based on that. With the new version of the CC4D Tools, I added a presets category to the asset browser contents, which holds a character definition preset for joint hierarchies coming from Character Creator, iClone or ActorCore, a character definition preset for characters coming from Mixamo, as well as a character definition preset for the CC4D Control Rig. Let's open up the Character Definition Manager again and click the Load Preset button at the bottom. Choose the CC4 Joints definition preset and click the Extract Skeleton button. If you can see a yes in the Joints ref column for each body part, you know that the extraction worked correctly. The last thing to do is to click Set Reference Pose button at the top of the window and close the Character Definition Manager. Now let's do the same thing for our control hierarchy. Select the CC4 control null object and add a character definition tag to it. Open up the manager and click the Load Presets button. Select the CC4D Control Rig definition preset and click the Extract Skeleton button. And again, if you get a yes in the Joints ref column for each body part, you know that the extraction was successful. And just as a note on the side here, for the definition of the control rig, its control objects need to be assigned as joint references. So let's click the Set Reference Pose button and close the Character Definition Manager. Select the character definition tag of the control rig character and click the Create Solver button in the Attributes tab. Drag the character definition tag of the animated actor into the source character field of the newly created character solver tag. And if everything was set up correctly, we should see the animation being retargeted to the control objects of our control rig character once we hit play. Now let's have a look at how to retarget animation data coming from the ActorCore motion library onto the CC4D Control Rig. For this example, I've chosen the fist kung fu animation you can see here. When we click on the download button, we get some additional export settings. Here we can decide if we want to export our animation on one of our ActorCore actors or if we want to export the motion only. But to be able to retarget the animation correctly to the CC4D Control Rig, we need to have an actor. So I go with the male robot. Choose Cinema 4D as your target application and your preferred FPS and click download. In Cinema 4D I already have a character exported from Character Creator and prepared it with the CC4D Control Rig. But first let's have a look at the downloaded animation data. Even though we downloaded the motion from the ActorCore library with an actor, the motion and the actor itself will be separated. When we open up the FBX in Cinema 4D, we can see that it only holds the animated joint data, which is what we need. But to properly retarget this sequence onto the controls of the control rig, it's still missing one thing. And that is a good reference pose in the beginning of the sequence. This could be the actor's bind pose or a T-pose. So let's add our actor to the scene by going to File, Merge Project and selecting the FBX file located in the actor folder of the downloaded contents. We can see that this actor is actually in a T-pose, so let's quickly merge it together with the animation sequence. The first step is to move the whole animation sequence one frame. We can easily do that by opening up the timeline, selecting the root joint and dragging the whole sequence one frame to the right. Now we could simply keyframe the T-pose on the skeleton of the imported actor and copy over the keyframes. Or we could add a pose morph tag to our animated joint hierarchy. Make sure to check position, rotation and hierarchy under the mixing tab. Delete the pose 0, which is created by default, and add our T-pose actor as an absolute morph target by dragging its root bone into the poses field and clicking yes in the dialog that is showing up. As both skeletons should have the exact same hierarchy and names, the animated skeleton will snap into place and we can go ahead and keyframe the T-pose. We can do that by selecting the hip joint, right-clicking and choose Select Children to select the whole hierarchy from the hip joint. And in the Attributes tab under Coordinates, we can set a keyframe for all three rotational values. Now we select only the hip joint again, and also set a keyframe for its position values. We can now delete the pose morph tag and the T-pose actor from the scene, and if we scrub the timeline we can check if everything worked correctly. And as the animation is coming from the ActorCore library, which is related to Character Creator and iClone, it's probably a good idea to check the joint hierarchy for null objects and convert them back to joints with the CC4D Convert Nulls to Joints tool. Select the root joint and click the CC4D Convert Nulls to Joints icon. Now let's parent the joint hierarchy in a null object and copy everything. Now we can go ahead and paste in the skeleton with the animation into our scene. And just for a better viewing experience, I will move the animation a little bit closer to the scene's origin by adjusting the position Y-F curve for the hip joint in the timeline. Before we can start the retargeting process, we need to adjust the control rig setting. We're going to set the arms and legs from IK to FK by snapping the FK controls to the IK positions and setting the IK-FK blend sliders to 100%. And I also make sure to set the FK follow shoulder parameter to 100% on both hand controls. And I will also activate the auto elbow pole for both arms. And as the actor's bind or reference pose is a T-pose, we also need to bring our control rig character into a T-pose. We can do that by selecting the upper arm controls and rotating them upward a bit. Now we're gonna start the retargeting process by adding a character definition tag to the hierarchy holding the animation data. Let's open up the Character Definition Manager again and click the Load Preset button at the bottom. Choose the CC4 Joints definition preset and click the Extract Skeleton button. If you can see a yes in the Joints ref column for each body part, you know that the extraction worked correctly. The last thing to do is to click Set Reference Pose button at the top of the window and close the Character Definition Manager. Now let's do the same thing for our control hierarchy. Select the CC4 control null object and add a character definition tag to it. Open up the manager and click the Load Presets button. Select the CC4D Control Rig definition preset and click the Extract Skeleton button. Let's click the Set Reference Pose button and close the Character Definition Manager. Select the character definition tag of the control rig character and click the Create Solver button in the Attributes tab. Drag the character definition tag of the animated actor into the source character field of the newly created character solver tag. And if everything was set up correctly, we should see the animation being retargeted to the control objects of our control rig character once we hit play. Let's now have a look at how to transfer animation data coming from Mixamo onto the control rig. For this example, I've chosen the Wave Hip Hop Dance animation from the Mixamo library. To download it, simply click the download button in the top right, and for the download settings, we want to download it as FBX binary with skin and 30 frames per second. Again, in Cinema 4D, I have already prepared a character exported from Character Creator with the control rig. So let's have a look at our downloaded animation data. When you open up the FBX and hit play, you can see that the animation was downloaded successfully. But you may notice that all the parameters on the skeleton are grayed out and you can't really change anything. The reason for this is that FBX files downloaded from Mixamo are coming with different takes. To change a parameter within a take in Cinema 4D, you need to either override it or adjust it when the main take is active. But we don't want to do that. The take holding the animation data is the take with the name mixamo.com. We want to convert this to the main take and remove all the other takes. We can do this by going to File in the Take Manager and selecting Current Take to New Document. Now we have a clean file with no takes and we can start our retargeting preparations. The only thing we need to set up here is a proper T-pose or bind pose in the beginning of the sequence. Let's do that by first opening up the timeline and shifting the whole sequence one frame. And to reset this character to its bind pose is actually pretty simple. As it was downloaded with skin, we just need to select one of the two weight tags on the character's geometry, and in the Attributes tab we click the Reset Bind Pose button. Now we can go ahead and select the hip joint, right click and select Children, and in the Attributes tab under Coordinates we set a keyframe for all the rotational values. Now we select only the hip joint again and keyframe its position as well. Now we can create a null object to group our joint hierarchy and copy everything. In the scene with our control rig character, let's first make sure we have the correct FPS value in the project settings, and then let's paste in our animation data. Before we can start the retargeting process, we need to adjust the control rig setting. We're going to set the arms and legs from IK to FK by snapping the FK controls to the IK positions and setting the IK FK blend sliders to 100%. And I also make sure to set the FK follow shoulder parameter to 100% on both hand controls. And I will also activate the auto elbow pole for both arms. Now the last thing to prepare is the reference pose for our control rig character, which is a T pose, and we can easily do that by simply rotating the upper arm controls up a little bit. Now we can start the retargeting by adding a character definition tag to our animated joint hierarchy. We open up the character definition manager, and from the presets we choose the Mixamo joint definition preset. Once that is done, we can extract the skeleton, set the reference pose and close the character definition manager. Now we add a character definition tag to the CC4 control null object of our control rig character. We open up the manager, and from the presets we choose the CC4D Control Rig definition preset. Now we can extract its skeleton, or rather its control objects, and set the reference pose. But you may have noticed that the control rig definition has 52 joint references, while the Mixamo definition only has 51. This is because of the spine component of the Mixamo definition. It only has the Mixamo spine and spine 1 joint reference to it and will be retargeted to the spine FK mid control and the spine FK chest control. Therefore, we need to adjust the character definition of our control rig character a little bit. Open up the character definition manager again, and in the spine component, remove the spine base FK control from the list. Once that is done, click the Set Reference Pose button one more time and close the character definition manager. Now with the character definition tag of our control rig character selected, we click the Create Solver button in the Attributes tab and drag the character definition tag of the animated joint hierarchy into the source character field of the newly created solver tag. And if everything was set up correctly, we should see the animation being retargeted to our control rig once we hit play. Let's now also have a quick look at how to transfer animation data coming from Rokoko Studio in case you want to record your own motion capture data. For this demonstration, I'm going to use one of the example clips you can download within Rokoko Studio. To export a clip, simply go to the Export tab. We're going to choose FBX as the file format. And we will also include the body mesh, even though this is not necessary with animation data coming from Rokoko Studio. You will see why in a minute. In Cinema 4D I have again my CC3 Plus character already prepared with the CC4D Control Rig. So let's take a look at the exported animation data from Rokoko Studio. When we open up the FBX and hit play, we can see that the export of the animation was successful. And we can also see that there's already a proper T-pose in the beginning of the sequence. This is also the reason why we wouldn't need any body meshes with skin weight tags, because we don't need to reset the character to its bind pose. So we can go ahead and use this right out of the box. The only thing I'm gonna change is to remove all animation tracks from the Newton joint so I can freely place it in the other scene. Let's copy the whole hierarchy and go to our scene with the control rigged character. Let's make sure we have the correct FPS value set up in the project settings. And then we can paste in our animation data. Now let's quickly adjust the control rig settings by setting the arms and leg controls from IK to FK, and also make sure to set the FK follow shoulder parameter to 100%. And as a last step, let's bring our character into a proper T-pose by rotating the upper arm controls up a little bit. Now we can start the retargeting process by adding a character definition tag to the Newton joint hierarchy. Open up the character definition manager and from the presets choose the Rokoko joint definition preset. Extract the skeleton, set the reference pose and close the character definition manager. Now we add a character definition tag to the CC4 control null object of our control rig character. We open up the manager and from the presets we choose the CC4D Control Rig definition preset. Now we can extract its skeleton, or rather its control objects, and set the reference pose. Now with the character definition tag of our control rig character selected, we click the Create Solver button in the Attributes tab and drag the character definition tag of the animated joint hierarchy into the source character field of the newly created solver tag. And if everything was set up correctly, we should see the animation being retargeted to our control rig once we hit play. But as we can see here, the transfer of raw motion capture data can sometimes lead to somehow weird looking posture. But we can already adjust this to some extent in this stage before baking everything down to the control objects of the control rig. Let's delete the character solver tag so we can modify the reference pose of our character again. Let's select the shoulder controls and rotate them down about 10 degrees. Counter-rotate the upper arm control about 10 degrees in the opposite direction. And do the same thing for the other arm. Now let's also rotate the shoulders forward a bit, about 5 degrees. And again counter-rotate the arm about 5 degrees in the opposite direction. Select the character definition tag on the CC4 control null object and click the Set Reference Pose button. Once this is done, we can click the Create Solver button again and drag in the character definition tag of our animated joint hierarchy. The pose of the shoulders is already better. Let's now also fix the rotation of the arm. Let's delete the character solver tag and adjust our reference pose once again. Select the left upper arm control and rotate it upward a bit. And one more time, select the character definition tag on the CC4 control null object, click the Set Reference Pose button and create a new character solver. Now the pose looks already way better before anything gets baked down. And for the last segment, I will actually use this sequence to show you how to bake everything down to the control objects of the control rig. And just for the record, I also adjusted the reference position of the thumbs a bit more. Even though this looks weird in the beginning, this gives me a better initial position for the thumbs. So let's start baking our control objects. Before we begin, let's quickly open up the visual selector of the character and dock it somewhere into the layout. Now we can easily select all the control objects of the character at once, or just specific controls we want to bake. Let's open up the timeline and drag our selected control objects in there. Now we can go to Functions, Bake Objects, or simply use the button in the toolbar on the top. In a small pop-up window we get some baking options. We want to bake expressions. We don't need to create copies. We want to have clean tracks. and we need positional data and rotational data, but we don't need animated parameters yet. Let's click OK to start the baking process. Once the baking is done, we can delete the character solver tag as well as the character definition tag on our control hierarchy, and we can also delete the animated joint hierarchy from the scene. By hitting play, we can quickly check if everything was baked correctly. This looks good so far, but we have to do some cleanup. Let's open up the timeline once again and switch from user mode to automatic mode by clicking the big A and the toolbar on the top or going to View, Automatic Mode. Let's also go to Filter and activate the Animated Only filter. This will show us all the objects from the scene in the timeline that actually have keyframes on them. Let's now go to the Layers panel and activate the Manager display for all the layers. If we now take a look at the timeline again, we can see after unhiding all those layers there are a lot more objects visible. Which means there are actually a lot more objects that got baked down and have keyframes on them than just our control objects. So how can we fix this? The first step is to hide the Manager display for our control layer. This will hide all of our control objects in the timeline. Now click the little Filters button in the top right of the timeline to open up the Filters panel. Now open up the Objects drop-down and click on the Null Objects icon. This will select all the objects from which we want to remove the animation tracks, which are basically just null objects. All that's left to do is simply hitting the Delete key on the keyboard to remove all the tracks at once. Now if we enable the Manager display for our control layer again, we can see that the animation tracks of our control objects are still there. And if we hit play, our animation should be still working as expected. And as we had all controls selected during the baking process and the new elbow auto pole function activated, the transformations of the IK controls and the elbow poles got recorded as well. If we would go ahead now and switch the arms and legs back from FK to IK and deactivate the auto elbow pole function, we can see that the animation is still working with slight differences in the position of the elbows and knees. I will now fully focus on a more automated solution for importing, baking and also exporting animations to and from the CC4D Control Rig. But I hope for the moment these manual approaches are helpful somehow. Let me know when you have any trouble. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.